Julian Kupske, December 24, 1971. A plane takes off from Lima, Peru, headed for the city of Pucallpa. On board Lanza, Flight 508 are 92 people, including a 17-year-old girl named Julian Kupske. Julian had just graduated from high school the day before. She was flying with her mom to spend Christmas with her dad. But during the flight, the weather gets really bad. The sky turns dark and lightning struck the plane. It blew open the fuel tank in the wing and made the fuel spilled out. The right engine caught fire. People scream. The plane broke apart in mid-flight and crashed into the jungle. Julian's mom is thrown out of the plane. A moment later, Julian gets pulled out too, but she's still strapped to her seat. She's falling through the sky, but instead of screaming, she feels weirdly calm. Her seat is spinning around and around, almost like a helicopter. She wonders if that's what's helping her fall more slowly. Then everything goes black. Julianne wakes the next morning. She's lying in the middle of the jungle. It's raining. She's drenched, covered in mud, and half buried under a row of airplane seats. She manages to drag herself fully underneath for shelter, but even that small movement is almost too much. Her collarbone is broken. There are deep cuts across her body, one already crawling with maggots. Her lower leg is fractured, her knee ligament torn, and her back badly injured. It takes her a day and a half before she can finally stand. The first thing she does is look for other survivors, but there's no one. What she does find is a horrifying scene. 3 passengers still strapped to their seats, buried in the dirt, only their legs sticking out. At first, Julianne hears planes overhead. She hopes they'll spot her, but the jungle's too thick. She can't see them, and they can't see her. Then the planes stop coming. That's when it hits her. They're not searching anymore. If she wants to survive, she'll have to do it on her own. Julianne was raised in the rainforest, literally. Her mom was a famous ornithologist, her dad a zoologist. They ran a research station in the jungle, so she wasn't terrified. She actually knew how to survive here. She remembered something her dad once told her: if you're ever lost in the jungle, find water and follow it. And that's exactly what she did. She finds a small creek and follows it. Food is a huge problem. The only thing she has is a small bag of candy she found near the crash site. She rations it, just a couple pieces a day. As the creek gets bigger, Julianne starts walking in the water. She sees crocodiles, but they leave her alone. After 10 days, she sees something amazing: a boat. Near the boat, there's a small path leading into the forest. She follows it, crawling now because she's so weak. The cut on her arm is throbbing with pain. It's full of maggots. She reaches a small hut. Inside is a can of gasoline. Julianne remembered a time when she saw her father treat a dog's infected wound with kerosene. Thinking of that, she decided to pour gasoline into the wound on her arm. It burns badly, but it works. She pulls out about 30 maggots. Later, doctors will find 50 more. She spends the night by the river again. The next morning, she goes back to the hut, and finally, someone finds her. 3 Peruvian men. At first, they're scared. Julianne is pale, dirty, and her eyes are red. They think she might be a ghost, but Julianne speaks Spanish. She tells them who she is and what happened. The men take her in a boat to the nearest village. Then, she gets to a hospital. Julianne was the only survivor of Flight 508. And here's a crazy twist. A movie director named Werner Herzog almost took that same flight, but he canceled at the last minute. Years later, he created a documentary about Julianne's story called Wings of Hope. Bahia Bakari. Bahia Bakari was born in France on August 15, 1996, the eldest of 4 siblings. Her father, Qasim Bakari, worked as a cleaner. Her mother, Aziza Abudu, was a homemaker. In June 2009, Bahia and her mom planned a special trip, a summer vacation to the Comoros Islands, to visit family and especially her grandfather. Her father and siblings stayed behind in France. They flew from Paris to Sana'a, Yemen, on Yemenia Airways, Flight 749. Everything went smoothly. From there, they would board Flight 626, a late-night flight from Sana'a to Moroni, the capital of Comoros. Flight 626 was operated using a 19-year-old Airbus A310-300, first built in 1990. It had logged over 53,000 hours in the air. It carried 142 passengers and 11 crew members. The plane took off 24 minutes behind schedule around 9:50 p.m. local time. The 5-hour journey over the Indian Ocean seemed routine. Pilots communicated normally with air traffic control. Nothing seemed wrong until they approached the airport. Around 2 a.m., the plane started to descend toward Moroni Airport, but strong winds and poor landing equipment made things tricky. The pilots had to fly past the airport, then turn around to land from the other side, aiming for runway 20. At first, everything seemed fine. The plane was about 800 feet above the ground. Bahia remembered seeing the lights of the island below, but then things changed quickly. Inside the cockpit, the pilots were focused on finding the runway with their eyes. They stopped paying close attention to their instruments. Because of that, the plane started to come down too fast and too steep, more than 2,000 feet per minute at one point. A warning system in the cockpit shouted, "Pull up! Pull up!" The pilots reacted and leveled the plane for a moment, but it didn't last. The plane began to drop again. The pilots decided to cancel the landing and try again. They pulled the nose up, brought the wheels in, and pushed the engines to full power. But it was already too late. Then came the stick shaker, a signal that the plane was no longer flying safely, and just like that, they couldn't recover. The nose of the plane went up too high. The plane lost speed. A warning for stalling started. The plane suddenly dipped. A sharp jolt, then nothing. When Bahia regained consciousness, she was in the water. Her face had hit the window. Her body was battered and bruised. It was pitch dark. She grabbed onto a floating piece of wreckage, alone, terrified. She remembers hearing someone screaming in the distance, but Bahia couldn't see anyone. Bahia drifted in the Indian Ocean for more than 13 hours. No food, no water, just the taste of salt and jet fuel in her mouth. As the sun came up, a rescue boat saw something floating in the water. A man named Matafa Rafu looked closer. It was Bahia. She was too tired to swim. Then she started to sink. Without thinking, Matafa jumped in. He grabbed her, tied a life ring around her, and helped bring her to the boat. Bahia was rushed to a hospital in Moroni, then transferred to Paris, where she finally learned the truth. She was the only survivor. An international investigation began immediately. The French BEA, Yemeni officials, and Comorian authorities all joined in. Years later, the final report concluded pilot error caused the crash. The approach was unstable. The pilots ignored warning alarms. Poor training, stress, and lack of preparation were all contributing factors. France also revealed that the aircraft had previously been banned from flying over French airspace due to safety concerns. In 2022, 13 years later, a court in France found the airline guilty. They had caused the deaths of 65 French people, including Bahia's mom. Bahia became known as La Miraculée, the miracle girl. She later published a book titled Moi Bahia, recounting her experience. Vesna Vulović. In 1972, Vesna Vulović was just 22 years old. She was a young and bright flight attendant working for Yugoslav Airlines, and she loved her job. On January 26th, she boarded Flight 367, a regular flight from Stockholm to Belgrade with stops in Copenhagen and Zagreb. Interestingly, she wasn't even supposed to be on that flight. There had been a mix-up with another flight attendant who had a similar name, and Vesna was assigned to the flight at the last minute. The plane, a Douglas DC-9, departed Stockholm with only a few passengers on board. When it landed in Copenhagen, more travelers boarded, bringing the total number of people on board to 28, including 23 passengers and 5 crew. From there, the Douglas DC-9 took off once again, climbing smoothly to 33,000 feet. For about 45 minutes, everything was normal. Then, without warning, a bomb exploded in the luggage compartment. The front of the aircraft was blown off. The cabin depressurized instantly. At that altitude, unconsciousness hits fast, and death usually follows. The aircraft broke into pieces mid-air, scattering wreckage over the Czechoslovak countryside. Everyone was killed, except one. Vesna was found alive, pinned inside a section of the tail that crash-landed into a snowy forest near the village of Srpska Kamenić. Investigators believe that Vesna might have been trapped by a food cart during the crash, which probably helped slow the crash just enough to save her life. But she wasn't just hurt a little. Her skull was cracked, her legs were broken, her pelvis was smashed, and her spine was badly damaged. She fell into a coma and was taken to a hospital in Prague. Vesna had literally fallen 33,330 feet. That's over 10 kilometers without a parachute, and she survived. It's a Guinness World Record that still stands today. But while the fall made headlines, the real mystery was, why did the plane explode? The cause was believed to be a terrorist attack. A Croatian nationalist reportedly planted a bomb in a briefcase, checked it into Flight 367's luggage in Stockholm, and then left the flight during the Copenhagen stopover. He got off, but the bag stayed on. Vesna herself recalled seeing a man in the terminal who looked angry and suspicious. Several crew members and even the station manager noticed him too, but no arrests were ever made, and the man was never officially identified. It wasn't the only attack of its kind. Yugoslav authorities reported over 100 politically motivated bombings against military and civilian targets in that era. After the crash, Vesna started to recover, but it was slow. She spent 10 months in rehab before she could walk again. Surprisingly, she never became afraid of flying. She returned to work with the airline, but later took an office job instead of flying. Cecilia Sechin. On August 16, 1987, Northwest Flight 255 took off from Detroit Metro Airport. Families were heading home, travelers were settling into their seats, and flight attendants were preparing for a routine trip to Phoenix. But just seconds after liftoff, something went terribly wrong. The flight crew forgot to deploy the plane's flaps and slats, crucial surfaces on the wings that help generate lift. Without them, the aircraft couldn't gain enough altitude. The takeoff warning system, which should have alerted the pilots, didn't go off. Later, investigators found that a crucial electrical circuit breaker had been pulled out. Some believe it might have been deactivated earlier in the day to silence nuisance alarms, a deadly oversight. Just 30 seconds after takeoff, the plane stalled and slammed into a highway overpass. 156 people died, all passengers, all crew, except for one. She was 4 years old. Her name was Cecilia Sitjan. Rescuers combed through the burning debris, expecting no survivors. But a firefighter from the Romulus Fire Department, John Theed, heard something. At first, he thought it was a doll. Then he moved a seat, turned his head, and saw a tiny arm. It was Cecilia. Her body was badly burned. She was still strapped to her airplane seat, which may have shielded her from the worst of the impact. Her legs were broken, her skull fractured, and her skin blistered with third-degree burns. She was rushed to the University of Michigan hospital with severe burns and multiple injuries. The world watched, stunned. A photo of her in the hospital, tiny and bandaged, made headlines everywhere. The world called her the miracle child. But behind the headlines was a devastating truth. Cecilia's parents and her older brother were among the dead. After the crash, Cecilia's surviving relatives shielded her from the media. They took her in, raised her in Alabama, and gave her something close to a normal life. George Lamson Jr. It's January 21st, 1985. 17-year-old George Lamson Jr. is boarding Galaxy Airlines Flight 203, a Lockheed L-188 Electra. Sitting next to him is his dad, George Sr. They're heading home to Minneapolis after a fun weekend in Lake Tahoe. The plane carried 71 people in total. Takeoff was late, just after 1 a.m. The aircraft rumbled down the runway and lifted into the dark Nevada sky, but almost immediately, something was wrong. The crew felt violent vibrations shaking the plane. Thinking it might be an engine problem, they pulled back the throttles to reduce power. At the same time, the co-pilot radioed the tower. They needed to turn back, but they never made it. Less than 2 minutes after takeoff, the Electra stalled. It plunged nose first and crashed barely a mile and a half from the runway. The wreckage was scattered. Most passengers never stood a chance. But somehow, George Jr. survived. When the plane split in half, George's seat was thrown from the fuselage, still strapped to him. He was blasted through the flames, landing on South Virginia Street. He was conscious, alive. It was nothing short of a miracle. But George wasn't completely alone. At first, his father and another passenger also survived the impact. Sadly, both died later from their injuries. That left George Jr. as the only survivor of Flight 203. Out of 71 people, just one teenager walked away. The question was, how could this happen? The NTSB investigation revealed a tragic chain of errors. Before takeoff, ground crew had been using a faulty headset to communicate with the cockpit. Since it didn't work, they switched to hand signals. In the confusion, the crew forgot to properly close the air start access door, a small hatch under the plane. That open door caused the strange vibrations after takeoff. Now here's the critical mistake. Those vibrations weren't dangerous by themselves. Other Electra pilots had reported that the shaking usually smoothed out at higher speeds, but the captain, thinking it was an engine problem, reduced power, and he never restored it. Without enough thrust, the plane's wings stalled. That's why Flight 203 fell from the sky. The NTSB's final report blamed human error. James Polhinky, August 27, 2006, Bluegrass Airport, Lexington, Kentucky. It's just past 6 a.m. and Comair Flight 5191 is preparing for departure. The small regional jet carrying 50 people on board is headed to Atlanta. Captain Jeffrey Clay, 35 years old, pilot in command. First Officer James Polhinky, serving as the co-pilot. It was early. Both men had been on duty since before dawn, and fatigue was already a factor. The plane, a Bombardier CRJ-100, was cleared for takeoff. But here's the critical detail. Bluegrass Airport had 2 runways. Runway 22, the long one, 7,000 feet, suitable for jet takeoff. Runway 26, the short one, only 3,500 feet, meant for small prop planes. The CRJ-100 was supposed to take off from runway 22 to do so safely, but in the cockpit, no one noticed. The engines roared. The jet accelerated down the wrong runway. Passengers, half asleep, probably felt nothing unusual, just the normal push of takeoff. But 37 seconds later, it happened. The plane sped off the end of the runway, smashed through a fence, and slammed into a field. Everyone on board was killed instantly, except one. James Polhinky, the co-pilot, was still alive inside the wreckage. He was critically injured. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors put him into surgery immediately. His leg was amputated. He was left with brain injuries and permanent disabilities. When James finally woke up, he faced a haunting reality. He was the only one left. As the sole survivor, James Polhinky became the center of controversy. Investigators confirmed the jet had taken off from the wrong runway, but the question was, how could both pilots have missed it? James, however, said he remembered nothing of the accident. The crash had wiped his memory of those crucial minutes. Families of the victims wanted answers, and some wanted accountability. Lawsuits followed. Many pointed fingers at James, accusing him of failing in his duties as co-pilot. After the accident, James lived a quiet, reclusive life. His injuries left him permanently disabled. He used a wheelchair and needed constant care. Reporters tried to reach him for interviews, but he almost never spoke publicly. The crash defined the rest of his life. Vishwashkumar Ramesh. On June 12, 2025, Air India Flight 171 lifted off from Ahmedabad, headed for London. The aircraft, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, seemed perfectly normal. On board were 242 people. The aircraft rolled down the runway and lifted off just after 1:30 in the afternoon. Everything looked normal, but then barely 30 seconds later, it was over. The plane had only reached about 600 feet when it suddenly stopped climbing. Instead, it pitched up, wavered, and began a shallow, unnatural descent. Eyewitnesses later said it looked less like a crash and more like a failed landing attempt until the terrible explosion. The plane slammed into a student hostel just 1.5 kilometers from the runway. A fireball engulfed the building. Out of the wreckage, a man stumbled out, injured but alive. People pulled out their phones and recorded what looked almost surreal. Out of 242 people on board, only one man survived, Vishwashkumar Ramesh. He was seated in 11A, a window seat near the wing, which, as it turned out, shielded him just enough to escape with his life. Engineers and investigators quickly pieced together the flight data and find both engines lost thrust. Minutes into the climb, both fuel control switches slipped from run to cutoff, effectively cutting off fuel to each engine in rapid succession. Cockpit voice recordings add another layer. One pilot can be heard asking, "Why did you cut off?" The other replied, "I didn't do so." There was confusion. No clear indication that either meant to shut off the engines. No evidence of sabotage or a technical bird strike, but the ram air turbine, RAT, kicked in a few seconds later, indicating a total and sudden loss of engine power